Hi, this is Steve with Electrathonparts.com. Thought I'd do a video on wheel bearings. I've gotten some questions about them, about people replacing them and people having them not last in their vehicles. If done right, wheel bearings should not really be an issue. I've been racing Electrathon for about 9 years now, and in that time, I don't believe I've suffered a single wheel bearing failure. So if you are getting them, it's likely something is happening either in the installation process or in the way you have them adjusted. If you run them too tight, you'll ruin them pretty quickly. But today we're going to cover swapping bearings in this thing. This is one of the crate wheels. This is one that is actually bent. It got damaged in a race, and so I spray painted it so I wouldn't lose track of which one it was. So I'm just going to take these bearings out and put them back in just for the purposes of demonstration. When taking them out, on any wheel really, you want to make sure you can support the wheel as close to the hub as possible. So I took a couple scraps of wood and drilled a hole in it so I can drive the bearing out without having to transmit all the force through the entire wheel. It keeps the force close to the hub. It makes it easier to get out. When installing bearings, you want to make sure you do not drive on the inner race. When pressing them out, however, you don't have a lot of choice because you have to go through the center of one to get to the other. So in this case, I just have a piece of 3/8 rod with a slight bend in it that I put in there for other reasons. But you just go in enough so you can catch the inside race. That one popped right out. It's down there. Same thing for the other side. And that one's out. So taking them out generally isn't a real big deal. Now, if you have a bearing that has come completely apart and the center race is gone and the balls are gone out and all you have left is the outer race, it can be a bit more difficult trying to get it out because it doesn't give you much to drive against. But the principle still holds true. Support the center of the wheel and then get down in there with a punch and then work your way around the outside race driving it out. Don't concentrate on just one side because it can cause the thing to cock in there and it can actually damage the inside of the wheel, so it won't hold a new bearing well if that happens. So go slow, take your time, work it out evenly. For putting them in, this is what I like to use. This is just a 1/2 inch threaded rod with a couple of 1/2 inch drive sockets that happen to be the right size to match the outside race, because when putting them in, you do not want to press on the inside race. You only want to press on the outside. So I'm going to turn it where you can see both sides. Take it up by hand so you can watch how the sockets seat, make sure they're pressing on the outside race as they should. Just a ratchet wrench in this case. And it pushes both sides in simultaneously. When one side bottoms out, the other side will follow right behind it and chase it on in. But this way, you can press down pretty hard and you're not putting any strain into the bearing itself, only in the outside race. And once it bottoms out and doesn't want to go anymore, you're done. Real simple. I ruined a wheel about a year ago now, before I developed this system, when I was trying to drive them in using a socket and a hammer, trying to drive them in. Well, the bearing shifted just a little bit, and this is just a cast aluminum bore of this wheel. And aluminum is pretty malleable, so if you get the bearing in there a little crooked, the bearing itself can actually damage the bore of the wheel. So by the time I finally got that bearing out and then back in the correct way, it didn't fit tight anymore. It actually rattled around very slightly in there. So I like doing it this way. So that was bearings out and bearings in. Now, when you go to install them, your wheel, Of course, on the crate, which this is a crate in construction, but there's an axle sitting there, we use 1/2-inch aluminum spacers on the inside, and then the wheel, and then a castle nut. So all you have to do to get the proper amount of preload on this thing is go in to where there's no play in or out, or if you pull on it, you cannot feel the wheel move. If I go a little looser, you can probably hear that movement. But right there, there's no movement. Watch how well it spins, right? You might even be able, from there, be able to see the bend in that wheel, which is why it's no longer a usable wheel. Spins very nicely. If I go just 1 notch more, right? Didn't take much. Notice how poorly it spins now. There's too much preload on those bearings. Those bearings will not last if they're allowed to run like that. So we go back to just that 1 other notch right there, where a pin will drop into it. Just like that. You do not need a bunch of preload on this. You'll notice that when I put the bearings in, there's nothing sitting between these bearings in there. Some wheels do run a spacer that goes between the inboard or the inside races of the bearings. And that's all fine and good if that is exactly the right length. If it is off, if it is too short, well then by trying to go with a bunch of torque on that nut, you're still loading your bearings too much because the spacer is too short to absorb any of that. If the spacer is at all too long, then your bearings are not seated tight in the wheel, and it's conceivable that under hard cornering forces, the wheel itself can move back and forth on the outside race of the bearings. And once it starts moving, it will wear the aluminum, and then your bearings don't fit right anymore. So spacers in between the bearings are fine if they are exactly right. But in my experience, it's hard to get them exactly right. It's just easier to go without them and just set your preload on your castle nut with some reason and some experience. Don't go crazy with it. All this is covered, well, the torque, the preload torque is covered in the crate assembly instructions. Swapping bearings is not. But I now offer replacement bearings for these because I've had a few people complain that their bearings didn't last. And I have to assume that they probably had them over tight when they installed them. Because again, it does not take much. I can literally get this one the way I like it with just my fingers alone. That right there is where a pin lines up. I have no play at all. Nothing. So that right there is exactly how I would run that wheel. If I had a cotter pin in it, which I didn't for the purpose of this video, I could remove the nut with my fingers. The nut is just there to keep the wheel from falling off. It doesn't have to be tight. And if you find that as you try to tighten the nut on, that it just doesn't line up right, that one notch is too tight and the next notch is too loose and you have play that you don't want, what you can do is take your spacer off, take a piece of sandpaper on a very flat surface, take your spacer and just rub it, turn it and rub it until you wear it down very slightly and just keep checking it until you get just the right amount worn away that the nut now lines up properly without too much or too little preload. You can also try just trying a different nut because there's going to be some variation in the nuts. If you don't have another one though, just try wearing down the spacer slightly on some sandpaper on a flat surface.